Good afternoon and good morning to our friends out on the West Coast. And thank you for joining us today for today's Lunch with Leo webinar. Today's session is creating engaging online learning experiences. I'm Dan Thompson, and I'll be joined by my colleague today, Austin Rutledge, and we'll be both your co-host and your co-presenters. Before we get started, I'm actually going to turn it over to Austin for some quick logistics.
All right, thanks, Dan. Everybody should be able to see my screen. I do want to follow along with Dan's presentation today. So I'm going to hop over into Leo. We'll be talking a lot about Leo today, and I'm going to join his Nearpod presentation. And for those of you that have joined us, you can find a link to this Nearpod presentation in the chat window. So I am now, Dan is in control. So Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Right. Thank you, Austin. And so just a few more logistics before we get started with the actual content today. So in addition to having and presenting using Nearpod and with the chat or the link in the chat, we'll also be using Zoom, as you're well aware by now. I'm sure many of your lives revolve around Zoom. And just a couple things in there. There's the Q&A feature that we use in Zoom. So if you could, if you have any questions, please post it there. If you have a general inquiry or want to share something with the group, the chat is a great place to do that. So just those are the two areas that we'll use to do some sharing. And then with that, we'd like to get past the logistics and get into it. So I will let Austin, I guess, introduce himself, and we'll get moving with our presentation today.
Yeah, so for those of you who have joined us for some previous Lunch with Leos, you might know a little bit about me already, but I just wanted to share, a little bit of my experience. I've taught and worked at a number of institutions, kind of all over the Southeast and the Midwest. Currently, I obviously working for Da Vinci Education, also really enjoying teaching classes at Tulsa Community College. It's kind of an outlet for me to still be able to be in the classroom with students. So it's something I really love.
All right. And then I guess I would be remiss not to introduce myself. As many of you know, I just said at the beginning, my name is Dan Thompson, kind of echoing Austin's points there that kind of picture there are the different institutions that my career has been fortunate to take me through as a faculty developer, if that's a word, and instructional designer, and typically throughout med ed. Today, we do want to start off with a quick poll for everybody. So, and just to let you know that everyone's that participates, your answers will not be seen by other attendees. So, so feel free to share.
Except for me, right, Dan? Since I'm live here.
Yeah, I'm going to call you out for sure. Anyway, if you weren't live.
Yeah. So, if I could have one superpower, what would it be? Since everybody's watching me, you're going to see me pick here. I'm going to go with the ability to fly. I think that's pretty solid. I can't not go with that one. Okay. Curious to see what everybody else says, though.
Yeah, so we have a few more rolling in right now. We'll just close this in about 20 seconds so we can get moving. Just wanted to see if people can are comfortable with using our presentation tool today. Austin's going to get into this later, but this is just modeling a little wait time.
While we're waiting, Dan, I think someone was asking about a lesson code. So if you're able to follow the link in the chat, you can actually join the Nearpod there. Otherwise, if you just go to nearpod.com, I'm going to paste this in the chat for you as well. There is a code. If you go to nearpod.com, you can utilize that code, I think, to join the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Austin. And let's see what our results are for the first question here. Okay, actually, invisibility went out. How about that? I'm not going to share my answer since I hosted that and I don't have to. All right, so today's objectives. So we really want to get to three things, and we really want to be focused on getting through to just tangible, actionable teaching methods and just ways in general to engage students today. With that in mind, we made our objectives to be, first of all, create learning experiences that meet the needs of online learners. And so we'll define what those needs are as a setup for the rest of the presentation. We'll also talk about actively engaging students in an online environment. And of course, we also will talk about how to encourage not just student and faculty interaction, which is really key, especially in that online environment, but identify the ways that we can get students still interacting together, both in a synchronous and asynchronous manner. So starting off, we mentioned how are we going to meet the needs of online learners? And it's first and foremost important to identify what those needs are. So, with online learners, although it's very simple for us maybe to do a lecture like Austin and I are doing now, although hopefully the interaction we're adding is helpful, it can be rather passive, the same way it would be passive in the actual lecture hall. So students need to be kept in the loop first and foremost. So we always need to communicate with them. And if there's ever any doubt, it's okay to over communicate, whether that's through your LMS or through email or video, brief videos like recording that Austin and I are making now. There's always great value in making sure that they're always in the know, because once they start to get out of not understanding exactly what's going on, then that's when they really are going to fall behind or lose interest. And once they fall a little bit behind, especially in healthcare education, that can really snowball on them. Secondly, we always want to make sure that they're comfortable in that online environment. And there's many ways to do that, and we'll get to this a little bit more through some of the tips, especially that Austin's going to share in the middle today. But we want to make sure that the online environment is somewhat similar to the in-person environment, to find some of those comfort zones for students. And again, we'll mention some of those today as well. And we always want students to be able to communicate in and out of class. And that's, in this regard, we want to make sure that they're able to do it to and from faculty. So class shouldn't be a one-way street, just like in typical in-person class. Students should have the ability to raise their hand and ask a question, or worst case scenario, hang around class and chat with the professor. And that's something we really lose in the online world, is not being able to have that hang around class. Or, it can be difficult at times for even you as a faculty member to read the body language of students, to see when they're engaged, confused, disengaged. And so just like we're doing right now, right, Austin, where we can't really see our audience, so we have to do our best to try and hit these points to make sure that you are engaged and comfortable and have the opportunities to communicate back with us, either through a chat, your LMS, or email. And then finally, students, when we say no surprises, we don't want any surprises going into those exams. So as you go through and you're thinking about the teaching methods that you're using, remember that formative assessment should be a vital part of that. And of course, that's just the type of assessment we use to drive learning forward, so that students can not only have a chance to self-evaluate when they're taking these assessments, but they also can get some feedback from you, the faculty member. Remember, formative assessment is never over until you provide that feedback. Otherwise, it's kind of just like an exercise that students are doing. And we want those engagements with course content to be much more meaningful than just students answering some questions.
Unmute myself. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about engaging students. So kind of getting on to point number 2, and what you can do to really make your online experience, your online course, whether it's online live or an asynchronous course, make it engaging for your students. So one of the first things I want to talk about is course architecture, and then we'll get into talking about some various teaching methods and different online learning tools that you can utilize. And so when it comes to designing your course, excuse me, on the next slide, there are a few things to really be aware of. And so number 1 is, how do you design it? So what does the architecture look like? And a lot of this really should be, as you can see kind of from this image here, can be laid out in the syllabus. And so, it's that question, I'm sure nobody in here ever gets a question that you can always answer by saying it's in the syllabus, right? That happens to me a lot. And so, really helping to spell that out in the syllabus will go a long way. But think about in an online course, oftentimes see a lot of people structuring it week by week. And so, each week is kind of its own thing. So you might have learning objectives that encompass everything throughout a week. You might have different expectations for activities or assignments or things that happen within a single week. And so you can see here, this screenshot from Leo, our learning management system. We really pride ourselves on having this kind of calendar interface at the heart of that system. And so it makes that, a lot easier to communicate those expectations, what's going on up front with students. And so even having things like you see on the screen in an engagement policy. So really defining what you expect in terms of their participation in discussions, or your expectations for joining live lectures via video conferencing apps like Zoom or whatever else you might use at your institution. And then finally, providing time, being sure that you're not just focused on the activities and what the activities have to be, but making sure that students are provided ample time in between to meet those expectations that you're setting for your students. Oftentimes, you'll see a lot of that is thinking about how many credit hours your course is. Obviously, I'm definitely guilty myself of in the past of providing more material really than is reasonable for students. So, really keep that in mind as well, and make sure that you're providing that ample time for students to meet those expectations that you're setting for them. Now, when it comes to online courses, no, you're good, Dan, you can go ahead. So when it comes to online courses, I know a lot of us are kind of new to that, and there's definitely some challenges that a lot of us have had to meet in the last few months. And so here is an open-ended question. We definitely want you all's participation here. I'm going to practice a teaching method here and create an awkward pause. I'm going to give you guys some time to think and answer this. So if it feels awkward, that's okay. Just go with it and feel free to think about and answer this question. I'm going to do the same.
To break that awkward pause, there are some great submissions coming in right now. We may share a couple. Don't worry, if we do share yours, it will still be anonymous.
All right. So I'm curious to see, Dan, what are some of the things that people have said here, since you're in control of this?
So I'm going to share a couple. First and foremost, oh gosh, we have so many to choose from. Here's a logistical one that can be difficult to deal with. Learners not always having the same device. That's a great point that as EdTech guys, Austin, I'm sure we've seen plenty of times and had to overcome, probably you more than me.
Yeah, that is a good point. So, it is important to think about what your learners have access to, in terms of not just devices, but in terms of connectivity. If depending on where students may live, they might have better access to broadband internet than in other places. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I mentioned before, like that providing time, especially in an online, an online live course, but even like an asynchronous course, having that flexibility in between expectations for those students to be able to work through those issues, and even an outlet for them to inform you and let you know about those issues up front can go a long way in terms of easing anxiety. So.
And we can use this as a good transition here. No pressure on this one, Austin. This is what you're speaking to on the next few slides, but how to integrate tools in an online environment. So hopefully we can help with that part. And we've seen that's enough. Plenty of the other comments here are directly related to that is that, and then one other, Austin, that we like to hit on is minimum interaction. So let's make sure we focus on those, the interaction and integrating tools.
Okay, excellent.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. We appreciate your comments on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So with regards to teaching methods and the tools that you might utilize, I know, especially in med ed, I know a lot of people are really big fans of team-based learning, problem-based learning. And, this is what you're seeing on the screen is really what a lot of, courses, what a lot of instruction looked like a year ago. But now it looks a little bit different. It might look more like this. And so how do you, what do you do to, I guess, provide some of those same instructional support for students in this type of environment where you can't really walk around the room and touch every group? There are some of the methods that you use in a live lecture class, like I like this one. I really like the 10-2 method, right? So this is referring to every 10 minutes of instruction, 2 minutes of processing time. And so that might look different at different levels, but that's kind of an average way to think about it, based upon adult learning psychology. And this might look different in an online environment. You might have some very awkward pauses like we had a little bit earlier today over a Zoom call, and that's okay. I recently read an article, actually a video from the Harvard Graduate School of Harvard Graduate School of Education, and they were talking about how a lot of the best ideas actually come after that awkward lull. And so having that minute or two that might feel a little bit awkward might allow students to really dig deeper and bring out some ideas that maybe they didn't even know that they were, going to arrive at. And so definitely that 10-2 method and thinking about how you can just utilize awkward pauses. Now, one of my favorite teaching methods, think, pair, share, isn't necessarily an option for that online environment. So, it's kind of hard to turn to the person next to you if you're not there. There are tools within a lot of video conferencing apps. Like I know Zoom supports breakout rooms. I know there are other video conferencing tools that support breakout rooms. And so instead of maybe a think, pair, share, it might be think, group, share. And so thinking about how those students they can communicate with each other in those groups and then maybe come back and share. And so that obviously is going to take a little bit more time than maybe a think, pair, share does. So think about that when kind of planning your lecture and, the material that you want to cover. Some of the other things that I really, really like, SCORM content is a great way to make asynchronous material very interactive. And so they're kind of building those e-learning modules and making those fun for students. They can happen any place, anytime. Lecture capture as well doesn't just have to be something that happens in a lecture hall. A lot of those tools also provide you to record content. Some of them even make it interactive for students, whether it's embedding quiz questions. And then as well as Zoom, obviously, we're using Zoom. I know in Leo, we really try to provide kind of one-stop access to a lot of these tools for students. So whether it's SCORM or lecture capture videos or even access to Zoom meetings, we want to be able to provide that right from the LMS. And we actually have kind of a beta version of a Zoom integration set up now so that students can click on a link and see all the Zoom meetings for a particular course that can be managed by the instructor of that course. So a lot of helpful tools. And then, really digging into your toolbox, some of my favorite things are tools from all over. I think to make things engaging, it's helpful to have variety. I think if Dan and I used, like we're using Nearpod today for this presentation, if we did that every time, eventually it might get a little bit stale, right? So we want to mix it up a little bit. And so thinking about the different tools that you can embed in Leo, on the next slide, Dan, I think I have some, okay, yeah. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and thinking about those embeddable tools and which ones are more engaging. All right. And so I think this is a drawing activity, if I'm not mistaken, Dan.
You're correct.
And so the idea here is with Nearpod, and you guys are all following along with us, you can circle or draw an arrow, point to whichever one of these you think is maybe more engaging for your students. So I'm going to go ahead and answer that one real quick as well.
And one point that I wanted to kind of tie together a little bit that Austin's been making and talking about some of the embeddable opportunities here. There is a link I just dropped in the chat that with more information on how to embed different types of EdTech into Leo. Is that I talked about at the opening the needs of online learners and being able to have those embedded in a single place for students to come and access that content makes it much more simple for them to be able to engage within that content. So you're not sending them to different websites or sending them posting a link here or emailing a link there, but being able to actually embed it within the event page makes it just the same way that they would get any other content, their PowerPoint, a link to a video to watch, or the syllabus even. They can access that just the same right there in that event page. So that really brings that back to the students that are just not confused, in the know at all times. We really do have a lot of great drawings. I apologize to anybody whose drawing is going to get shut off during this, but let's share this one, because this is really great artistry. So to whomever that artist is, thank you so much for the great imagery. And obviously that was a loaded question, Austin, and I gave you there, but that would be the correct answer we're hoping for.
Yeah, so here's the slide I was mentioning earlier. So that idea of embedding, just like we showed you with that image there, being able to embed a live Nearpod presentation, students can go right to the event and click to join the Nearpod presentation. And so there's less confusion about click here or click there. Obviously, we know you all couldn't get into Leo today to click on to join it as I did, as you saw earlier. So we wanted to provide you guys that link. And so, but there are lots of other tools out there, and almost any tool, learning tool out there, a lot of them are embeddable. There's even some tricks. Even if the tool doesn't actually have embed code that it generates, we have some tricks that we can utilize. And so whether you're using, like on the previous screen, Padlet, Flipgrid is one of my favorites, by the way. And then things like Quizlet are also really fun for students to kind of check their own knowledge. It's really more for an asynchronous type of environment. But the embed option is really cool, even with Nearpod, which specifically doesn't provide an embeddable presentation for a live presentation. You can just take, and I know some people get intimidated a little bit when they see code like this. And so this is just a little bit of code. It's one line. And the article that Dan shared, we actually have in there everything that you need. So it's really just copy and paste. You don't have to know what any of it means. I don't really know exactly what it means myself. I just know that if you copy and paste everything and put it in the right order. So copy and paste this iframe, and then copy and paste your link to whatever learning tool you need inside of that iframe. And it just kind of like magically appears. Like I said, I don't really understand. I'm not the developer guy myself, but it's really cool how you can get some of these learning tools right into your learning management system. And so like Dan said, getting everything kind of in one place for your students. And so I really encourage you to check out that article. If all of those tools that I mentioned on the previous slide are actually in that article as well. So you can check those out.
Great. That was very, very well said, Austin. Thank you. And so we're going to close with this. Hopefully, get time for some questions. We already have a few questions in the Q&A. So if you do have any before we finish, feel free to throw them in as we close up on the last slide here. So objective number 3, we talked about student-to-student communication and how we want to make sure we encourage that as well, because that's an important part. Well, we also want to provide you with the why, and the why of student communication are things that we've seen over the course of education. We've heard for years and years, probably dating back to many of us in undergrad, but it helps students to develop self-directed learning skills. We know, especially those going to healthcare education, those are very important skills to have, as they should be lifelong learners. It's a safe place to share ideas. Sometimes students in the whole class can be intimidated to share, or they can be intimidated to share even with the faculty member for fear that they might have a poor grade assigned to that. But if they're sharing within peers, it's a safe place. They learn by teaching others. If for all of you on this this Zoom webinar right now, Austin, I don't need to go into how much more in depth you learn content when you're preparing to teach others or going through the process of teaching others. You live that every day. And communication skills. In healthcare education, as we know, and these students that you're preparing for their career, this is vital that as they communicate with patients and of course with their teammates in the field. And this is just one of those ways for them to develop those skills, both through discussion, but also in the feedback process of providing useful feedback in a professional way, and also receiving feedback in a way that they can then go and improve their own career. Austin, I'll let you jump in on some of those the methods here.
Need to unmute myself again. With regards to how do you do the communication? It's important to, like as you, Dan, said, kind of starting with the why, but in terms of actually carrying that out, be sure that you utilize all the messaging tools within your LMS. I know Leo provides a lot of ways to send announcements and reminders to students about various upcoming events, or even with regards to communicating reminders about evaluations that need to be completed. Those are obviously really important things, which brings me kind of that next point down there, peer evaluations. That's a great way for students to really communicate with each other, and oftentimes by de-identifying some of those, you can make it really enriching, because the students feel like they can offer really honest feedback about whether they're working with members in team-based learning or problem-based learning, which we're going to be talking more in our upcoming Lunch with Leos about TBL and small groups. So I'm going to cruise past that one. Dan, I know there was some stuff that you wanted to add about case-based learning.
Yeah, I guess we'll close on CBLs here. So, in case-based learning, I'm sure that many of you have encountered this as a student or as faculty, where you give students information on a case that they need to take, aggregate, and go do some research on to be able to find a solution to the problem posed. That's a great way in which students can communicate throughout that process, and I'm sure many of you have been doing that. One area in which I've used case-based in my career to really advance the student thinking and also student collaboration is at the end of the case, and let's just say we're at the higher end of students, and they're doing the differential diagnosis, the diagnosis, and then some sort of treatment plan maybe. Is at the end of that, what we've done is ask students to create their own learning objectives for what they would like to learn next, based off some of the content they learned in that case. And typically what we see there is students push above and beyond what our expectation is for them, and oftentimes, and they can answer that in any way that you would like. It can be anything from a discussion post to a one-page paper, whatever, or even a mini video, whatever best suits the way that you would collect student submissions in your class. But them creating their own learning objectives is a really great way for them to engage with content, but also engage with others and share some feedback that way. With that, we're coming right up against our 30 minutes. So we are going to take some questions at the time. We already have a lot of great questions. So Austin, I'm going to jump right into it. I'll actually volunteer to take the first one. The first question was, when does variety in tools increase cognitive load to a level that is too much? That's a great question. We don't want to bore students, but we also don't want to overdo it. I think that a point that we made earlier, I'm going to go back to that and say that if you can have it available in a given place, I think that's really key to where students don't have to worry about multiple logins, don't have to worry about multiple downloads. It's really tough to troubleshoot student ed tech issues when they're not in a classroom. So keeping it as simple as possible and having them access that content or those different systems through a common system, like Austin was talking about with the embedding, I really think that's the way to go. So they have that comfort zone of, I'm always going to log into Leo. I'm always going to log into Leo. And here's this different tool. And also, I would just be aware of the user friendliness of said tool and listen to your students as well. Finally, they give you some feedback on being overwhelmed. And if they're too focused on the tool and not the content, then you've kind of hit that cognitive load barrier.
Yeah, Dan, that's a great point. I like what you said about being focused on the tool instead of the content. I know, me as an EdTech guy, I get really excited about all these tools. but I'm often like, I'm guilty of being wanting to use a certain tool for the tool's sake instead of thinking about which tool best communicates the content I want to communicate. And so keeping the focus, like you said, on the content itself, I think is really critical. And like Dan said, when it comes to cognitive load, you probably don't want to be switching between applications, within a single 1 hour event. Maybe think about what you're utilizing, as Dan said, the user friendliness and how often you want to do that. You probably also don't want to be teaching them a new tool every time you get together. So just keep that in mind. While yes, things sometimes can get stale if you do the same thing over and over, if you're constantly changing it, then it can be maybe a little bit too much. So there's that kind of middle point that I think is nice to hit.
So we are at 31 minutes. We apologize. If you have to drop off, we'll hit your questions afterward. We'll make sure that we reach out to you. We save everything. Austin, if we could do these last two just really quickly for anyone that's able to stay on. One, I'm throwing this at you, buddy. Can you embed SCORM courses within the page too?
Yeah, so I saw that one pop in, and I wanted to touch on that. So I do love SCORM content. I've kind of whet my appetite with developing SCORM content a little bit here and there. And one of the great things about Leo is it doesn't necessarily, because of the way SCORM works, it doesn't embed right into the page in Leo, but it provides them a link to access the content, and it opens right up within the same window. It's still within the Leo system, and it's great because you can still track learner activity within that SCORM content. So whether they are how much time they're spending with it, but also even if they're completing any quizzes or, answering questions, doing certain things within that SCORM content, you can track completion and even get those score reports into your learning management system. So it's really, really cool.
That's great. And then actually we're going to end there because we do have a number of other great questions that rolled in, and Austin or myself will reach out to you based on our expertise. But if you're asking about embedding, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Austin. Last couple of things, there's some references that everyone enjoys seeing. We are excited for the clients who are in the room with us today to show that we are doing DaVinci office hours tomorrow. So if you have any specific questions about embedding content or communication in Leo, you should have a Zoom link already in your email, or you also will be getting that information via our listserv. If you do have, it's noon to 1 Eastern time tomorrow, our office hours. We'd love for you to attend. And finally, our next lunch with Leo is in 2 weeks, July 15th. We'll be doing talking about teaching small groups at a distance. So, we somewhat address the topic of teaching small groups today, but we'll be more specific to the actual small group methods, and I'll present different ways to engage students with each other. And like Austin did today with some certain methods, we'll be more specific to provide some actionable ways to get that done. So as always, that's our time. It's been our time by 3 minutes. We appreciate everyone for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you in future Lunch with Leo sessions. Have a great day.